Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the AICP Certification Exam Content Outline. In this section, we'll be looking at fundamental planning knowledge, the second of the major topics on the AICP Exam Content Outline. And this is such a big part, we've broken it up into three different parts, and this is part 2 out of 3. My name is Jordan Yin, and I'm joined today by Chen Yi He and Tom Sanchez, both colleagues in the planning education community. And I'll move over to them and let them introduce themselves. As I mentioned, I'm Jordan Yin. I'm a faculty member in the Urban and Regional Planning program at Alabama A&M University, and also the author of Urban Planning for Dummies. And my colleagues, Chien, if you would introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Jordan. Hi, everyone. My name is Chen He. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Geography, Planning, and Sustainability at Rowan University. I'm also a member of American Institute of Certified Planner. Pleasure to be here.
And I'm Tom Sanchez, professor of landscape architecture and urban planning at Texas A&M University, also AICP, and glad to be part of this.
Great. Thanks for introducing yourselves. And we talked a little bit before we started, and both of you have taken the exam recently. I don't know that we've had any group of three. I've audited it. So we've all seen the exam fairly recently, which is great. So we're hoping to bring that knowledge to you all in a useful way. So a quick overview of what to expect in this presentation. It's organized like the others in this series, and it follows the outline structure of the AICP Certification Exam Content Outline, which you can find at the link over to the right of the screen that's posted at planning.org. And it's the outline itself is actually structured as a 3-level outline with major topics, subtopics, and then in most cases, definitions of key terms and concepts. So each of these sessions covers one major topic, and then within them, there's a variety of subtopics, and we'll get to those in a moment. There are sort of cue card versions of definitions of key terms and concepts that are the core of the presentation. And in some cases, there are additional keywords and cross-references and some examples of graphics and some sample questions that really are intended to demonstrate some different learning approaches. And with our guests, we'll also add in our comments about how this all relates to planning practice applications, real-world examples that might be useful in thinking about how to take the exam, test-taking strategies, study tips, and in some cases, additional references and resources, key things that you might want to pay attention to in terms of preparing for the exam. So this section of the exam is a couple of topics within the larger group of fundamental planning knowledge. It makes up about 15% out of the 150 scored questions on the exam, which is probably 22 to 23 questions. I'm not exactly sure how they decide which one it is, but it's in that neighborhood. And you get a score report when you take the exam, so it'll say how many there were. And the material on the content outline includes a total of 9 subtopics, and we're dealing with 4 of those here today. Excuse me, we're covering 6 of these today. So in terms of how to use this presentation, these are intended to be a broad overview of key concepts that might generally be associated with the outline items that should help a potential test taker identify their potential exam strengths and weaknesses, help organize a study plan, and also to help prioritize, because it is a common refrain that there's just a lot of territory to cover on the exam. So certainly helping to sort of catch the low-hanging fruit and then being able to dig down into things that need a little more attention is something that hopefully you'll get out of this. And there's more information about additional resources and the certification process and membership process on the One Path to AICP website at planning.org. So this section actually is just 4 subtopics. I think it says 6. That's a typo. Whoever typed those slides wasn't being careful. That'd be this guy. but it's part 2 out of 3. And the subtopics covered in this part of the major topic include natural, social, and economic systems, the general terminology, practice, and principles of related professions to planning, and then 2 major sections about technology. One, how technology can be used to advance planning, and a second about using information technology tools in planning. And for those of you that have seen changes to the outline over time, that these are somewhat, 3 out of 4 of these are somewhat new. That when the exam was updated for the 2022 exam cycle, the sections for A, C, and D were revised somewhat significantly. So if you're looking at an older exam version, or you have some notes from someone who took the exam previously, there may be some differences to take a look at. So let's move on and start to look at part A. The way this will work is that myself and Chen and Tom will switch off between various of these. So you might hear us break in and switch off and hand the baton off every now and then. But for this section, I'll take us into part A and then trade off with our guests. So in the prior version of the exam, this section actually was just called natural, social, and economic systems, and there were only 3 bullet points: natural systems, social systems, economic systems. For some reason, they changed this, and they moved it from being 3 categories to 11 categories. So there are a number of different facets of broad context that planners might want to pay attention to. Planners obviously are going to run into political context. Structures, functions of formal governance, such as federalism, intergovernmental relation, branches of government, public-private partnerships, and forms of local government. Again, the actual exam outline does not include any proper nouns. So you might, for example, see a question relating to how might a planning situation be handled in the city manager form of government. Well, that means that you understand political context. So be prepared for those kinds of things to happen. And these general terms, you might have to think about how to apply them in a more specific fashion. Demographics. I think planners can talk about demographics for a long time. But generally speaking, population characteristics of things like sex, gender, age, race, income, mobility, spatial distribution, employment, housing, lots of other detailed things that are possible. Again, something like the census is something that could come up as a question, although it's never mentioned on the outline, because that generally falls within the category of demographics. Social trends. Social trends refer to the patterns of change in societal behaviors, demographics, and attitudes over time. These trends can influence planning decisions and policies as they affect housing, transportation, education, public services. Understanding these helps planners anticipate future needs and design adaptable and inclusive communities. Again, not necessarily a specific definition, but something to be aware of, and probably draws a reasonable set of boundaries over how one might think about studying social trends in relation to the kinds of questions that might appear on an exam. And the last one of these that I'm going to do that actually is maybe a specific term. It's a little bit unclear, but social infrastructure is actually a term used by the author Eric Kleinenberg that loosely defines social infrastructure as the physical elements of a community that act as a conduit for bringing people together and building social capital, such as schools, libraries, parks, streets, usually public spaces rather than private spaces. So again, this might be a situation where a question might be something about how to go about planning a library, but the broader point might be, would this improve social infrastructure or something to that effect? So it could come up in a variety of contexts. For the next couple, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, who will be our reader, and we might throw in some comments as well.
So for sustainability and planning involving creating communities that meet present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own, integrating environmental, economic, social considerations to promote long-term health, stability, and vitality within communities. Sustainable planning practices aim to reduce resource consumption, minimize waste, and enhance the natural and built environments. And I think sustainability is one of those terms that, we've seen the language around this evolve, over time. And so a lot of the ways that we used to look at these systems before, just in terms of protecting them and in conserving these systems and not having impacts, now are falling under this terminology of sustainability. And so there's a lot of different connections involved here, environmentally, economically, socially. So it's a pretty broad topic. So as an example, which of the following factors contribute to global unsustainability? And then with the possible answers being pollution controls, resource inequities, renewable resources, and population growth. And I think as we look at this, it's, we're seeing the responses here, potential responses around population growth. And so we would, or population dynamics. And so we would probably, see those as pressures on sustainability. But this, the way this question's asked is really, focused on resources related to demand in terms of population. And so I think this is important to kind of think through what these potential responses are or answers to the question, and make good connections.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. And sometimes it's the case where you recognize everything in the question and you know what it is, but sometimes you just know what the question's about. Whereas if you know what sustainability is, you almost don't need to, the things in 1 through 4 could be anything. And I think that's oftentimes people think it's the balance between memorization and understanding.
Right. And on the topic of resiliency, and I think this is kind of similar to sustainability in terms of, we've seen the language kind of evolve, in this area. So resiliency being the capacity of communities to withstand and recover from adverse events such as natural disasters, economic shocks, social disruptions. And we're seeing, we're looking at resilient communities as being designed to adapt and change to changing conditions, and while trying to maintain essential functions and emerge stronger, from these challenges. This involves strategic planning, which we have done as planning for a long time. Robust infrastructure and community engagement. And so making those connections, that this isn't all the work of just the planners and what we think, but that community engagement piece being very important too, that we're understanding kind of the needs, the preferences, kind of the knowledge levels of the communities that we're working with. And so, and we've got some related keywords that kind of cross over, such as climate change, climate retreat, pre-disaster planning, related to this area of resiliency. And ecology, and I think this is probably one of those older of the terms, and again covering kind of covering a lot of areas, because we think about environmental ecology, and today we refer to ecology in different technology, the ecological systems in technology, and so social dimensions related to that. But an ecology being a system of interactions between people and their surroundings, also defined as a system of natural resources with or without human interactions. So again, kind of that emphasis on systems, that we so often focus on in planning.
Yeah, putting ecology on an outline is sort of like starting a book with the. I mean, it's just a really like, yeah, what does that not apply to? So yeah, no, that's a great point, Tom. And one more.
And water. I'd say this is probably a necessary factor for us to think about. Um, the water systems being both affecting the development of and development patterns and are impacted by development patterns. Looks like you're missing an N there. Through mechanisms such as water politics, water systems, technology, planning, development related to water bodies and lots of different kinds of impacts. I guess there's a reference to planning and urban design standards section on water. And as we know, kind of, water being essential to, urban systems of all types. And I think there are plenty of focus in how we look at that from a planning perspective.
Great. We got a couple more, and we'll move over and have Chen help us out with these.
So health is obviously another very important topic within planners' priorities, and especially with recent recognition and the trend of the social determinant of health, really recognizing that health is an outcome of a very complex system, which planners play a role in part of it. And within urban planning setting, health in planning focuses on creating environments that promote physical, mental, and social well-being. And planners do consider factors such as environmental hazards, environmental condition, for example, air quality, as well as infrastructure and built environment factors such as access to green space, recreational walkability, and the availability of health services. And it's important to note that healthy urban design aims to reduce the health disparities through intentional planning and design, and to encourage active lifestyles and to improve the overall quality of life for residents. And I think it's become more increasingly important that health as an outcome of planning goals through the practice of urban planners. So I will definitely pay more attention to this topic in the exam prep. And coming up next, climate. Climate relates to planning through addressing the impacts of climate change, especially with the increasing climate hazards and disasters. And planners' goals are developing strategies to mitigate and adapt to these changes and potential increasingly hazardous outcomes. Within the planner's role, we focus on reducing greenhouse gas emission as one popularly used strategies, and also enhancing energy efficiency, as well as implementing adaptive measurements to protect communities from hazards of climate-related risks, such as flooding, heat waves, and sea level rise, especially along some of the coastal area or other area that are prone to higher risk of climate hazards. And some of the related keywords and cross-references used for this can be, for example, climate resilience for older population and for other population groups or vulnerable communities.
Yeah, there's one more after this. The outline actually just says climate. It doesn't say climate change. It doesn't say climate impact. And I have a feeling it's a sort of a committee decision where there were maybe some people that wanted to call it like climate change, integration, adaptation. It was going to have like 7 words in it. And they just said, nah, we'll just call it climate. So I know that can be a little, I don't know, confusing, but I think we're all indicating that this is fairly broad. All right, one more. Oh, and there was a question here. So strategies to help combat climate change by planners involve the following. And again, question structure, it's one of these, here's a couple of things, which one of these does or doesn't belong. Dealing with greenhouse gases, vehicle miles traveled, adaptive reuse, water conservation. You both can sort of attest to this, that undefined acronyms do show up on the exam, don't they?
I believe they do.
Yeah, so you actually have to be able to. I mean, I think they do from having taken it recently myself. Um, so uh, um, so that sometimes you're going to have to pick up things and have a certain level of subject matter expertise. But this is very similar to the question that Tom shared with us. And again, um, from a study prep point of view, you come at this either by understanding a lot more of the details within a particular key area, or by just sort of saying, well, if this is what climate change is, and I recognize what these four things are, which ones fit and which ones don't. So again, some of these questions, you can come at them from the front or from the back, but it does presume that you sort of know the general concept. If the term climate change doesn't mean anything to you, you're in trouble. Sound right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I
All right.
found in studying too, I came across some materials that were, focused on acronyms, which was, helpful for me just to kind of refresh my memory in some of these areas that I'm, not thinking about on a day-to-day basis. So I think that that can be a helpful kind of study tool.
Absolutely. I always like to say that the exam really you have to be able to open up a lot of different folders in your brain all at once. Yeah, I find it to really be quite challenging. All right, one more to close out the section.
Finance. So finance is a very important area of knowledge for urban planners because we cannot function without having adequate fiscal capacity and budget and revenue knowledge, etc. So public finance applications include budgeting, fiscal impact analysis, development fees, capital improvements, financial tools. And I do want to mention that from anecdotally, my recent experience taking AICP exam, I experienced myself and heard it from other fellow exam takers that the term, for example, capital improvement project came up a lot. So that is definitely something that we want to pay attention to. What do these terms refer to and where do they happen within the planning practice? And some examples such as bonds and loan and what are their roles in help government or different sector planning work function, for example, municipal bond and some of the risk assessment for bonds, if you want to go into a little detail. And finance may also refer to real estate and other land development finance. For example, very importantly, tax increment financing, you might come across the term, for example, low income housing tax incentives. So those are all related to finance and pro forma analysis. For example, there are guidance on the revitalization and economic development and real estate development sections within the planning and urban design standards. And again, those are very important terms to pay attention to while you prepare for an exam.
Great. That brings us to the end of this section. Our next section will be about the relationship to different professions, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Section B of our presentation is the general terminology, practices, and principles of related professions. And this has been an exam outline feature for as far back as I can remember. And so we'll talk about 7 different areas that are identified on the exam outline. Of course, there probably are lots of other things, lots of other professions planners work with, like public administration that's not listed here. But these are some that have been prioritized for inclusion or possible inclusion on the exam. Public health. Public health and planning focuses on creating environments that promote the health and well-being of the population. This includes addressing issues such as air quality, access to green spaces, safe housing, transportation. Planners collaborate with health professionals to design communities that reduce health disparities and enhance the quality of life. 2, architecture. Probably the most common field that planners gain exposure to. In fact, in the official classification of educational programs, Urban and regional planning is considered, quote, a related service of architecture. Don't tell anybody I said that. Architecture and planning involves designing and constructing buildings and spaces that are functional, aesthetically pleasing, and sustainable. Architects work closely with planners to ensure that the built environment meets the needs of the community while preserving cultural and historical aspects. And this is an area where, for obvious reasons and historical precedents, there are a lot of cross-references. There are entire subfields, such as new urbanism and neo-traditional design, that really cross the discipline, where there are joint degree programs. There are areas like historic preservation and landscape architecture, where there are dual degree programs. And there are certainly classes and practices that overlap between planning and architecture in very significant ways. Again, it's hard to prioritize which is which, but certainly having a good understanding of architectural practices is something that's valuable to planners. Law. Law and planning encompasses the legal frameworks and regulations that guide land use, zoning, and development. Planners must understand and navigate these laws to ensure that plans comply with local, state, and federal requirement while also protecting public interests and promoting orderly growth. Again, these have a lot of cross-references and a lot of historical precedent, particularly in the area of zoning, although zoning is not terribly emphasized on the exam outline, probably for a range of reasons, mainly because zoning is so specific, and you would have 50 states with thousands of communities. So zoning principles are sort of fair game, but specific zoning is usually not a big exam topic. But overlaps between law and planning certainly are there. I can't think of any planning program that doesn't have a required law or legal basis class, and it's a fairly standard accreditation requirement. Engineering. Engineering and planning, especially civil engineering, involves applying technical knowledge to design and implement infrastructure projects such as roads, bridges, water supply systems, and sewerage systems. Engineers work with planners to create safe, efficient, and sustainable communities. Again, there may be some specific things that engineers get involved with planners with, whether it's a building type, like buildings, airports, bridges, and tunnels. And also, there are some areas where we are sharing with engineering now, things like smart cities, where there are engineering programs that are co-developing those ideas. And not to get too far into the weeds here, but right now it's 2024, and this category will exist on the exam outline for 2 more years, which means they might invent some new questions. So being, the exam is not usually very trend forward, but you never know. And so this might be an area to keep your eye on, because smart cities is certainly something that has entered both the planning and engineering vernacular. Real estate. Real estate and planning focuses on the development, management, and investment of properties. Planners work with real estate professionals to balance development goals with community needs, ensuring, or hopefully ensuring, affordable housing, commercial spaces, and public amenities. Environmental restoration. Environmental restoration and planning involves rehabilitating natural environments that have been degraded by human activities. Planners collaborate with environmental scientists to restore ecosystems, enhance diversity, and improve the resilience of community to environmental challenges. The outline term actually is environmental restoration. Why it's not environmental science or environmental engineering or environmental whatever is somewhat unclear. But as you're looking into these things, anytime you see a reference that might be to something about restoration or mitigation, might be something to sort of flag as you're thinking about the exam. And the final field that's identified, which actually lines up with the last item from the last section, is public finance. Public finance and planning refers to the management of public funds to support urban development projects. This includes budgeting, securing funding, and allocating resources for infrastructure, public services, and community programs. Planners must ensure financial sustainability and transparency in the planning process. And public finance is usually organized separately in terms of municipal organization. But as was mentioned previously, a lot of the work related to planning public finance has to do with capital improvements. So sort of these interconnections between sections is also something that comes up. And this brings us to the end of this. But Tom and Chen, do you have any sort of introspection on sort of which of these planners might need to dig into a little bit deeper, or some key things that folks might want to be aware of?
Well, I'll just say real quick. I think again, talking about systems and kind of related to these different professions that all are all kind of pitching in on the planning process. I think that's from a professional perspective, I think people get that experience. And for students that we teach, that's one thing that we try to emphasize is, they're not doing it on their own. They're working with engineers, they're working with architects, they're working with these different disciplines, in a variety of kind of design and planning spaces. So.
Yeah, I think
Right.
there's an exam, or I think there has been an exam question, something to the effect of something about hazard mitigation, where it says, what kind of expert would you call for help? Because planners are often sort of, connectors, right?
Right.
Right. Just to add on what Tom says, planners function in part of the system. We do our job, but we cannot do so without talking to other department. For example, might be water department, somebody needs to fix a pothole, or if you need to contact the engineering, if you have a development review that really concern traffic engineering, that you really have to rely on expertise and collaborative effort with other disciplines. So I think having that in mind is very important as we go through, especially some of the scenario questions in the exam.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the longer sort of scenarios and general examples where you sort of have to decide, well, would I call a lawyer or would I call the finance director? And those kinds of, and those seem like sort of ridiculous choices, but that's what multiple choice questions give you are ridiculous choices or, within that framework. So,
Right. And I
well,
recall in the recent exam cycle from my own experiences that there are a lot of situational questions. What would you do?
Right.
What would be the best strategy? What would be the smart thing to do? And then all of these options may sound like were read as a right thing to do, but you really have to figure out, okay, what would be the best option to answer this question? So just also keep that in mind as well.
yeah, that's a really good point. So a lot
Yeah.
of these framing terms really do help you think about those big picture, and especially when something is best or most appropriate, or in some cases worse or inferior, where some of those questions come in. Well, that brings us to the end of this section, and our next section will start to get us into the technology elements. Section C, how technology can be used to advance planning. And that's the actual phrase that appears on the outline. So there's a couple of things here, some of which are in fact new to the outline. But again, as technology evolves so quickly, there's some things that may seem like they're maybe missing. Um, One, automated vehicles and connected automated vehicles, smart devices, smart cities, and civil infrastructure.
So certainly a increasingly popular topic when we're looking at technology in cities, when we're talking about automated vehicles or AVs and connected AVs or automated vehicles. Automated vehicles being vehicles equipped with technologies that allow them to operate without human intervention. I think we see a degree of intervention a little bit, somewhere along the line. Obviously, there isn't complete autonomy, but connected autonomous vehicles expand on this by integrating communication systems that enable them to interact with other vehicles and infrastructure. This connectivity enhances travel safety and efficiency. AVs and CAVs promise to revolutionize transportation by improving safety, reducing emissions, enhancing mobility. Uh, However, they also present challenges such as the need for new infrastructure, changes in urban design, and potential increases in urban sprawl. And I think, this kind of technology we're talking about, the section being technology to use to advance planning, but I think in a lot of cases these are technologies embedded in the system that we're planning for. And so, yes, we're planning with them in mind. They're becoming part of the city, but then we're also having to plan for them. So, and smart devices, another kind of increasing trend that we're seeing talked about and experimented with. in lots of different cities. Smart devices, including sensors and smartphones and devices and IoT or Internet of Things and related technologies are essential in contemporary planning, and we're seeing these really as intensive kind of data collection tools. And so they're collecting and analyzing data in real time, enhancing the efficiency and responsiveness of city services. And smart devices facilitate traffic management. We've seen this for some time now with signal timing and detection and queuing detection, things like that. Also for environmental monitoring and infrastructure maintenance, among other things. And so by integrating these technologies, planners can make data-driven decisions that improve urban living conditions and sustainability, as well as resource management. And I think the smart devices topic is interesting for us to think about there again as being embedded in the city, performing tasks for us, whether that's data collection, but we're also having to plan for them as well. Where are the most appropriate places to place these things? Where are we going to be able to capture the most useful and appropriate data for our planning processes? So more than just the device as the technology itself, but what are we using it for in the planning process, or what could we use it for in the planning process? And smart cities, and certainly we're hearing lots about this, derived from self-monitoring, analysis, reporting technologies. The smart definition broadly used in technology industries, a lot of times associated with being autonomous, or having those functions built in. So the use of technology to manage community functions, service delivery across government operations, the built environment, and civic life. And I think smart cities is one of those terms. It's like, I can't tell you exactly what one is, but I know one when I see one. And or I know one tells me that that's what it is. But the smart having such a broad definition as far as what can how it can be embedded in the city, and how it can be used for planning purposes. So on one hand, we're trying to make the cities and urban spaces as efficient as possible, and I think on the other side of it, we want to be able to kind of leverage those tools to help us in the planning process with better information and better analysis, hopefully leading to better decisions and better recommendations. And the civil infrastructure systems involving design, analysis, management of infrastructure that supports human activity, including electric power, oil, gas, water, wastewater, communication, transportation, and buildings that make up urban and rural communities. Which generally refers to civil engineering assets in communities, and especially those associated with planning for capital improvements. And so, obviously, essential assets and aspects of the urban spaces that we're planning for.
Thanks, Tom. This is the official, this is what's on the outline, sort of a hodgepodge. And also with technology, Tom, you wrote the PAS report on AI, which is apparently not a topic for the exam, at least not in this cycle. But we're always sort of hitting a moving target, but these broader frameworks, is this civil infrastructure? Is this that? I guess the my takeaway from this is that if you get the big picture, you know where the little pieces fit. That's sort of your embeddedness emphasis, right?
Right. Yeah. 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 And also how these technologies can be used in different ways. We're using them to try to advance and make our cities smarter, but we're also trying to use them to make our planning, smarter. And so I think it's important for us to be thinking about these technologies kind of from both perspectives and what we know about them, or what their capabilities and limitations are.
That's also a really good point that translates into sort of a question framework, which is what does something do, or how can something be used, is very amenable to a multiple choice question.
Right.
If you're going to
Yeah.
spend X number of $1 million as a city on this, what will it do for you? A, B, C, D, and one of them won't fit. So
Right.
that's a really great way to think about it. All right, so that brings us to the end of this section. Section D, how technology can be used to advance planning. There's four major key terms and concepts in this section: visualization, spatial software, big data analytics, and modeling.
The first topic under the information technology tools is visualization. And I think this is one of the most important goals that we want to achieve in urban planning process. That is, we wanted to communicate with our community members clearly, especially under our paradigm of communicative planning and community engagement heavy process, which is really driven by clear communication with community member. And that can be very difficult to achieve without a great visualization tool. And according to the definition here, visualization is the process of taking abstract ideas or data and information and translating them into easily understood and interpretable images to enhance planning, urban design, and decision-making processes, such as photo montages, manipulated images. Not exactly sure what that means. It can be AI generated images that some planners can use in their projects, I believe, and 3D visualization and geographic information and system scenario analysis and visual preference methods. So there is a detailed section outlining what visualization mean in urban planning and in planning and urban design standards. But within planning practices, this is one tool that can really enhance planners' ability to reach the community members that we needed to engage in our process, and also to share the message, sometimes very critical, for example, in cases of hazard mitigation or on other trends such as share the population and economic trends within our community to inform, for example, comprehensive plan or long-range plan. Having great visualization tools can really help planners do our job even better. And spatial software, including GIS, which is Geographic Information System, can be used for the purposes of geographic data handling, analysis, and modeling. So this is very important terms for planners to get familiar with. May include terms such as planning intelligence and planning support system. Understand what are the commonly used spatial software such as GIS, which is the acronym for Geographic Information System, and also other open source software such as QGIS, and to really understand the role of spatial tools that can play in planning processes. And third is big data analytics, the utilization of administrative, archival, and real-time information from traditional and automated data sources, especially from very large observation pools or highly detailed data sources, or both. And usually when we talk about big data, it refers to a highly diverse and complex, and of course, by the meaning of big, there are large sampling size for the data collection. So it can be helpful to feed into the urban analytics system to really drive smart urban planning and urban management decisions, which Tom covered earlier in the section. But those are very important terms that we should really familiar ourselves with, especially with the ever-changing society we're in to get adapted to the recent technology in planning. And the fourth, and last but not least, being modeling. So I'm glad that AICP exam is not going to ask us to develop specific model with specific data set, but I am 100% sure this is very important concept for us to really understand, for example, spatial modeling, visual modeling, and other numerical model without getting too caught up with the details of what specific modeling mean, how do we construct them, but really understand what do they really refer to, what are the uses of them or simulation, and how they can really fit into help us understand our urban system to achieve the goal of planning and management. For example, one recently widely discussed topic is digital twins. Among other computational methods, they can be really powerful tools in help increase efficiency of our urban planning procedure and help create other effective models to inform smart planning and digital informed urban governance. So really, again, get familiar with those terms. I will read into some of the recent APA reports covering AI and other smart technologies regarding this topic, in addition to the outlines.
That's great. Thanks. As we went through those four things, you definitely see sort of the connection with the previous section where these are sort of overlapping concepts, right?
Exactly. Again, Tom mentioned earlier, we are functioning within the system that is highly dynamic, that is highly, ever changing. So being able to reference one concept or one term to what we discuss in other section. And again, planners' role are to adapt and really understand those meaning and the power of those tools, so we can really help us do our jobs better.
And also for what test takers have to think about, I think one of the reasons why they keep the language a little bit vague, like modeling. I mean, that's a really, it's not as big as ecology, but it's a big term, is that there's so many other proper nouns. And I think part of it is in your head just sort of thinking, okay, well, Google SketchUp, or what does this relate to? And you sort of have to be able to go back and forth. You have to go from general to specific and specific to general. And that seems to be something you're both emphasizing is, know how these things not just overlap, but know how they line up.
And I thought that was a good point that you made before, Jordan, about kind of, these technologies and knowing about them being a moving target. And you mentioned the PAS report, which I was finishing the PAS report in December, and in November, OpenAI announced ChatGPT, and it was like, gee, thanks. And this whole new area emerged that, I couldn't, hadn't been captured or hadn't even been thought about in terms of planning technology and AI up to that point. So I think it's that ongoing process, like planners do, of just trying to keep track of, so many different things that are going on in, in our urban environments.
Well, and as you might say, part of being a certified planner is knowing how and where to embed new things. And that's sort of what the exam is trying to tell us, right?
Right. Yeah.
All right. So that brings us to the end of this section. And thank you so much for these additional observations that really help add some depth to these content areas. So this brings us to the end of this section of the AICP certification exam content outline, from fundamental planning knowledge, dealing with some things related to technology, related professions, and natural, economic, and social systems. As you're moving away from this section, Hopefully this gives you an opportunity to identify some knowledge gaps that you might have, organize a study plan, including some additional resources. We've mentioned a couple of APA member resources like Planning Advisory Service reports, PAS reports, also some references to sort of the classic textbooks, and also for things where either it's sort of a high value added target or some things where you really need to brush up on, prioritizing some study targets by section and topic. Our panelists, anything that jumps out at you from this section where there's either sort of an opportunity to master some things and gain some quick points, or some things where planners maybe have some traditional weaknesses?
Well, I'll just say that I found studying for the exam just a kind of a great way to kind of review kind of and think about kind of, gee, look at everything that planners do. And also looking at kind of from a historical perspective on how these issues have evolved. And so my main strategy in preparing was to make myself a schedule, when I was gonna study, and then kind of review as much material as I could. And there's a lot. So I kind of knew I was gonna miss something, but I think there are lots of good materials, lots of good opportunities out there, lots of good stuff that's shared through APA and other sources.
And I'll just add on, I personally feel it's very important to find somebody to study with to create a plan, especially if you can find somebody who is taking exam in the same exam cycle. I personally benefited from having a colleague that is also preparing for the AICP exam. So we definitely learn a lot from just discussing some points. And I had realized that, oh, I definitely didn't catch on that point. So that was a great way to catch up some potentially miss out information and to review some of the most important terms. And I also think it's important for us to understand where are the areas that we're not super good at immediately. So we carve out time to really target that chunk of knowledge. For example, oh, I wasn't the best at certain area of history. For example, legal court cases. So designate certain time to go through those. I think it's super helpful.
Well, that's great. That sort of brings us to the end here. Thanks to our fantastic panel of AICP member volunteers, Dr. Tom Sanchez and Dr. Chen Ha. If you're watching us on YouTube and you thought this was useful, give us a like and feel free to share your feedback in the comments. Check out the APA website for more information on AICP One Path to membership and links to additional member resources, including copies of these presentation slides, hopefully somewhere on the planning.org website. And that'll do it for today. Thank you so much, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.